computer. Cool. This is going to be fun. Because I figure, if we ever mess it up or something, we can just, I can edit it out. Or also, I just think it's fun to have. I know you, obviously, based on the incredible enclosures that you have visible to anyone watching this in the background, you have an impeccable conciseness and cleanliness to the way you do things. And I do not. So I'm much more, a little more slapshod, a little more, I'm just going to get it done if I can get it. If I can take some duct tape and apparently don't use this microphone we spent all that money on, then I'm going to do it. It's fine.
Yeah, man. I mean, don't let the curated persona fool you.
Yeah, it's just a front, right?
There's plenty of duct tape around here, man.
Good. Well, I'm going to just do an improvised intro here and tell anyone who might be listening to this, welcome to the Project Herpetoculture podcast, with me, Philip Leitz, and my enigmatic, dashing, debonair co-host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, all the way from the UK.
Just finished my tea and crumpets, and now I'm ready to go.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, man. So what's going on with you? How's your day? How's your season? How's everything moving along right now?
It's good, man. I actually I may have witnessed a lock with my sulfurious a minute ago, which would be a huge deal for me because that's something that I haven't witnessed yet. I'm not actually sure because they were kind of in a cork tube, but there was some alignment of tails in such a way that I haven't really seen before. So,
cool.
That's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
And I'm getting ready to move. So a lot of my energy right now is like focused on building a couple of little 120 square foot sheds. Basically, that'll be my new herp rooms. There'll be a couple of them.
Is your move under any time constraint?
Well, it kind of is. I'm going to have to move the herps twice, which is a huge bummer, but it's what I got to do to make it work. So I'm going to move them to a friend's house who has a basement. And then I'm going to build these two sheds essentially to move them into.
Okay.
And, but it's better to move them to the friend's house than to keep them where they are now, because it's just the timeline here is too ambiguous, and it'll basically just depressurize the whole build time process. Because otherwise, I'm going to be like really rushing to finish these two buildings, and I'd rather not do that. I'd rather take my time. And I have a friend who has a basement, and she was basically really generous and was like, "You can just move the herps here and." Come in as often as you need to take care of them. And I'm like, okay, that would be a huge support. At first I was kind of like, no way. I don't want to, I don't want to move. I don't want to move them twice,
I can't even imagine.
It's going to be a beast, especially because the sulfurious setup, it's an 8 foot by 3 foot by 6 foot setup. And I have to take it apart to move it. And it's probably got like, I don't know, I mean, probably 600 or 800 pounds of soil in it right now.
Jesus Christ,
that's gonna be fun to move.
This just hearing you describe just the dimensions of the enclosure gave me PTSD flashbacks from when I was moving my Euros from my mom's basement into the shop. And it was just the most, the thing about moving is that when you move, at least from my perspective anyway, you might have like a good plan, and you may have a little bit of help, and you may have like sort of this mental model around how that move's going to look and how much you really have. But then you get what you think is like half or 3/4 of the way through, and then you're like, oh, I'm not even close to done. I have like 7, there's like, it almost feels like stuff just pops out of the walls, almost like, oh yeah, I forgot this thing and this thing and this thing. And or you hit a snag where you're like, wow, I realized that none of these cages are going to fit in any of my cars. So I have to either borrow a friend's truck or rent a truck or rent a mover or something. You're like, shit, I should have planned that. I should have measured that. I didn't, whatever it may be. So it's so stressful. And I do not envy you having to move yours twice, because none of those enclosures look like they would be a simple move. I mean, you're not, I assume you can't just carry them intact, right? You have to take things out of them, or can you?
No, I'm pretty much all of them. I'll have to at least remove the substrate
Yeah.
because they're all, deep bioactive substrate layers. And so there's a lot of weight. And I think that if I try to move them with the substrate in them, I'm likely to damage them.
Sure.
Just because of they'll warp from they won't have the support they're used to, and they could warp and all that stuff. So anyway, I'll probably have to move substrate out. And then honestly, I'm not super worried about anything except for the big sulfureous setup. That's going to be a bear for sure, especially because there's a background in it. So
yeah, that's a lot, dude.
I'm gonna have to peel the background off and then re-adhere it, and that's not going to be fun. But it's the second move, to where these sheds will be land that my partner and I are currently in the process of buying, and so hopefully that'll be a semi-permanent or permanent situation. And I'm going to be building these buildings such that they can be moved if I have to down the road. So just move the whole building.
Nice.
Which I might still have to take things apart at some, to do that, but it'll be a lot easier than trying to find a place to live where you can, have two. And I only have 2 rooms. I have a small setup. I only really have, I have 6 enclosures in this room, which is my tropical room. And I have 6 enclosures in my temperate room on the other side of this wall over here. And that's it. So that's, a dozen enclosures. That's not so many.
This, the right there, in the background, is that one of those sulfureous? I don't know what that
probably,
I don't know what it is.
Yeah. That's handsome boy. That's the sulfureous that I hatched when I was 16.
Oh, sick. That's a good looking, even on like this awful Zoom video, that's a sexy snake, dude. That's a nice looking animal. Good God.
He's amazing.
Yeah, he looks great.
Yeah, he's about 11 feet long.
Shit, that's a huge animal. Good
and
God.
He's puppy dog too. He's like,
ooh,
he's the most mellow sulfureous I've ever had. So
that's cool, man.
He's old. He's got cataracts now. He's in his twilight years, but that's the snake that honestly brought me back to herpetoculture.
Right.
That snake.
Right.
So I wouldn't have any of this stuff probably if it wasn't for him.
It's pretty crazy how the way the individual animals like stick to you. You know what I mean? Like, I think there was a time in my in my young years, maybe in like high school or something, where I couldn't imagine ever getting to a point where each animal didn't make like a super profound impact on me, like every single one of them, right? Like everything made a huge difference. I loved I still fiercely love every animal I have. I know them intimately, all of that, but there's definitely like the more you scale up your collection and the more you stack experience, at least I found anyway that it seems pretty obvious that some stick out more than others. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. I feel really similarly. Like, and also honestly, in some ways, that's kind of part of why I've scaled my collection to the size that I have, and is that I want to be able to maintain a pretty personal connection with each of them. And of course, even at the relatively small scale, that I'm working at, there are snakes that stand out for sure. There are lizards that stand out for sure that I have a special connection to. My first monkey lizard was like that. She sadly I lost her to issues with oviposition. But I've got her babies that I've just raised up. So that's really awesome. But she was an amazing lizard, and like like I've never had another lizard like it, but I would like walk up to the enclosure and she would run up to the glass. I would open the door, she'd jump out on my shoulder, and like I could just hand feed her.
Yeah,
She was
that's
like
cool.
totally like not afraid of me at all, and I could
Yeah.
like walk around the house with her on my shoulder just hanging out, and like give her a slice of banana, and she
Yeah.
would just be chilling there. And to
Man,
this day, I haven't had another one that's like that.
yeah.
They're all a lot more skittish, but her babies are the closest to her,
Yeah.
probably because they're born and bred, in
Hmm.
captivity. But
Yeah. That's really
um,
cool. When I was in high school, I had an iguana, and like just a regular old green iguana. And she, I raised her from a little baby, and I think I bought her at like PetSmart or something. Like read a book, and I was like, well, I just got to get an iguana. And I went to a couple of reptile shops, and they were out of them. And I went to a PetSmart, and there was a little cage full of babies. And I was like, all right, just grabbed one of them. I swear, I think she was $25, $40 or something. It was obnoxious. But it took me probably a year and a half to get her to calm down, because she was not friendly at first, obviously. And so after about a year and a half of work, it was all accumulated. And by the time she hit about 2, she was just as trusting as could be. And I kept her at the time in it's kind of embarrassing to admit now, but at the time I kept her in a big one of those old school reptariums that was like screen that you would zip over a PVC frame. And it's so bad. But I mean, in fairness, despite this sort of whack caging, she was in excellent health. Really,
mhm,
she's a beautiful animal. And
mhm.
by the time she got to 2, she had figured out that she could literally just claw her way out of the top corner of the reptarium. And my routine was such that I would come home from school, and I would come into my bedroom, which is where all my reptiles were. It was a bunch of bearded dragons and this one iguana. And she would be waiting on the bed, because I would go into my refrigerator and pick up all the greens that I had for the dragons, and I would bring them upstairs to chop them up. And she would sit and wait for me to feed her, because I would just hand feed her little pieces at a time. When I was chopping up greens, I was just sitting on my bed like a little dork. And that animal, she was one of the ones that really really sealed the deal for me. I mean, I had been keeping reptiles for a long time, but she was one of the first ones where I had really spent a long time, for me at the time, a long time cultivating like a very solid relationship, built a lot of trust with her, did things with her that I'd never done. I mean, I potty trained her, you know what I mean? It's like things that you never, when you're still young, you just never think, I can't do that with a lizard. And then, one of them changes your mind. And so actually that's a good segue into like the kind of the topic we want to go over in this particular episode, which is why herpetoculture in the first place. Like, why do it? What's the point? What are the upsides? What are some of the downsides? Things like this. So I guess if you're listening to the podcast, you probably know what herpetoculture is. So maybe we'll not bother defining it for anybody, because it should be pretty straightforward, especially for anyone actually listening to the show, unless you got here by accident. But so I think there's no real perfect way to start this out, other than asking, for you, what's the why herpetoculture, man? Like, why what do you think about that?
Yeah, man, it's a perfect segue. That's that story about the iguana, and just kind of that that relationship building process that you
Hmm.
had with it. And um I think that for me, it's, I mean, this is like massive question that I think about a lot.
Hmm.
And I can go to some pretty absurd depths about it.
Yeah,
And maybe we'll get there, but
sure.
I think a lot of it for me is realizing that. So I had a 10-year hiatus from herpetoculture through
Hmm.
my 20s.
Hmm.
Um, and in that time away from it, a lot of what I was doing was kind of like learning how to be a functional human being.
Yeah.
And,
Sure.
you know, like resolving some trauma from my early life, and just like, sorry, I think one of the snakes just fell. I fell off a branch. There's just like a thump behind me. Anyway,
Nice.
they do that every once in a while.
Yeah.
So I was doing that, and I was thinking back a lot, throughout that process about like what were the mechanisms that like kept me well in like the hard times in my upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really came to my mind was herpetoculture. Like that was something that I had as a coping mechanism, and really as like a source of continuous like wonder and curiosity and stimulation. And I was also like, when you're working with animals, you like enter into this like relationship with feedback that is really, really valuable, where you're like, especially if you're working with obscure stuff where there's no like playbook on on how you're supposed to do it. You just have to try things and then get feedback, the animals, and you have to learn what the animals are telling you in terms of, okay, I need to make these changes, or this is working, or that's not. And I think that just all of that was a huge source of just like wellness, essentially, for me. And that's actually where like the name for my little operation, Wellspring Herpetoculture, comes from. It's just like recognizing that like herpetoculture itself was like this wellspring for me, this like source of continuous like renewal and interest and curiosity, all of these things that I think are actually really vital for like healthy human beings. And I think also there is a lot to be said for the way in which animals can influence human identity. And I think that it's often really an under like appreciated aspect of like sharing our lives with animals, is that like in doing so, we're actually kind of learning different languages. We're stretching our minds, and our hearts in ways to like accommodate these creatures, to learn from them. Ideally, we're doing that.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that that's actually something that is kind of innate in human beings, like, and in other animals as well. But for the vast majority of our, history as a species on this planet, we were living much more closely to a broad array of other animals.
Yeah.
And I think that is actually a really huge thing that actually can support, again, wellness. And there are ways in which like animals can teach you things about yourself that other people can't teach you about yourself.
Definitely. Yes.
And I think that is that's just like a really profoundly valuable thing. And so that's kind of why herpetoculture for me, I think, in like, if I in broad strokes, is that it brings me into relationship with other species that fill me with wonder and curiosity, and that also require me to pay attention.
Yeah.
So that's my kind of like canned answer. Obviously not canned, but
no
candid answer.
Candid is right.
I'm curious where that lands for you, and how you would answer that same question.
Well, so first I just want to say I think that's I resonated pretty strongly with everything you said there. I mean, there's something about, I think there's a lot of surface level discussion when it comes to why herpetoculture, right? There's a lot of like you can make art arguments. There's something there's a sort of a generative creative element to what we do. I think that there's something similar to what you were saying, which is I think that for many of us and probably most people, there's probably a very deep-seated need to commune with other things in some regard, right? And I think maybe, sure, there are people out there who are like, oh, I'm just not a pet person, or like, I'm not, I don't have animals. And like, okay, that's fine, right? It takes all kinds, but whether we're talking about a dog or a cat, things that have probably been with us since we became human, or at least with the dog anyway. The cat maybe a little more recently, but still been with us for a very, very long time. And I think given that, it's probably not absurd to think that as humans propagated and spread all over the globe, and as agriculture and development came into the picture, it's probably not unreasonable to think that there were some people who just enjoyed that more, or did better with that, had more success as some kind of culturist, right? Whether it's a farmer, or maybe they were, in my case, some of my ancestry is Japanese and Korean. And so here and there I get, I'll get random sort of, silly pothead notions of thinking some of my ancestors must have been koi farmers or fishermen or farmers, or also martial artists, right? Because that's the other thing I do. So it's like all of that stuff feels like they're kind of intermingled in a way. And to give my why is more of like it's ongoing, because the ways that I started keeping reptiles and the reasons that I wanted to don't bear any resemblance to the reasons I do it now. Like, they're just not even close. I mean, sure, like there are some through lines, as in most of them are what you mentioned, right? Like, it brings me great joy to spend time with these other creatures that just by their dint of being present in my care forces me to be with it and attentive and considerate and thoughtful, right? And that's all there too, but there's something, it's evolving all the time. When I was a kid, it was purely just this obsession with this cool thing, this dinosaur, right? It was like nothing in my imagination could have been cooler than a real dinosaur. And reptiles are literally, that's exactly everything I've ever wanted, and there's something about them that I just am captured by and obsessed with. And there's always something else to notice or to learn. In some ways, it bears resemblance to martial arts in that way. There's no such thing as mastery. It's this ever evolving process of like shaving off imperfections and when you're dealing with different variables, like with martial arts, it's all about, don't die, defend yourself, right? Somehow. With reptiles, it's got all these other variables involved, which is like, how can I, there's things we don't know, right? Things, well, I'm not exactly sure how to determine the well-being of this animal. I'm going to have to figure that out. And so it feels exploratory, and it feels adventurous in a way. And yeah, I hope that makes sense, but that's if I had to wrap my description up into a bundle and say, here's why I do this, that's a lot of why, and I think, so one of the things, so with regard to herpetoculture as a topic, I thought it might be useful to also discuss or weave into this conversation some of the other justifications and rationalizations we've heard for why we do this, right? So the one that comes to mind for me is the invisible arc concept. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about what you think of when someone says the invisible arc and what that means to you?
Yeah, totally. First, though, I want to respond a little bit to what you said.
Go for it. Yeah, do it.
Just because I think that this is another thing another concept that you touched on that I feel like herpetoculture meets in me is like this very human longing for like tinkering, like
totally
being in a process of like adaptive management. I think that like adaptive management is like it's an ancient human process. I think about like land-based peoples, which we're all descended from at some point,
right.
And when I say that, I mean like cultures that have lived in the same place for like millennia without degrading it. Which is a huge achievement if you have any idea of what that requires. It's a huge achievement to be able to do that. And we all come from that at some point, and I think that that's just like a deeply innate human thing to want to like be managing things and making little adjustments and little like tending here, and there's like a very innate human longing to nurture things and watch things grow. And so I think in a lot of ways, like a lot of the issues that we're confronted with in like modern society and like like Western civilization, so to speak, are like disorders related to connection and disconnection. And the fact that like a lot of people feel super isolated and don't feel like they have a lot of connection in their life, or a lot of purpose and meaning in their life. And I think that a lot of that comes from the fact that we're many steps removed from the things that sustain us at this point. It's like it's like when you want to eat, you like go to your fridge and you like pull out a thing in a packaged container, and like it's a really different process, even if you garden, to like go to your garden and like pick a ripe tomato, or to take it a step further, like go hunt something, or something like that, which for the majority of our ancestry, that's what they did. They were living off the land in a more direct way. And the process of like achieving sustenance was in itself a connective thing, like because you had to know like it's not enough to just be a hunter. Like you have to know what you're hunting. You have to know its habits, its routines, what it's doing this time of year, what it's eating this time of year. Like
it's body language.
It's everything, And so I think that all of that, there's a deep human longing for just like actually being able to confront that kind of complexity. And in some ways, I think herpetoculture actually meets some of those longings. It's just, again, it's stimulating, it's adaptive. As you said, you can't achieve a place of just like stasis with it. And there's a strong motivation to continue in that process towards achieving mastery. And I say that, in quotations, because I think of that as like this North Star that is like an orientation point and not something you can actually arrive at. But the stakes are high because you're living with you're dealing with living creatures, and you want to do right by them. And so anyway, that's what I would just say in response to what you said. I feel like that's kind of touched on a little bit more of, again, why I do this and some of the thoughts I have around that. But as far as the whole invisible art concepts, I think that like originally that's kind of, well, not originally, but in a lot of ways that's referencing this book, written by, is it the Barkers that wrote it? I think.
I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, I think so.
I think it's from the Barkers. But essentially it's suggesting that within captivity, there can be a reservoir essentially, for biodiversity. And that's really important because biodiversity is really important. Like, I think that that's like something that people fail to like really grasp a lot of times, is just like how much our lives depend on biodiversity continuing to persist, because it's
Mhm.
like, as like a new disease emerges in nature, so does its counterpoint.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
sure.
the more that like the complexity of nature, the biodiversity of nature is reduced, the less stable and resilient
Mhm.
all biodiversity becomes.
Mhm.
Um, and there's like a lot of value in that as a metaphor too. But I think that, yeah, this concept of the invisible arc being that, within the hands of like private keepers and private institutions and public institutions like zoos and
Mhm.
aquariums and stuff like that, you can actually create essentially a reservoir of genetic material
Mhm.
with these species to preserve them and conserve them for generations to come. And this is particularly salient, in these times where um, so many species, even common species, are still routinely threatened by habitat loss and
Mhm.
um, all sorts of related issues. So
Mhm.
that's how
Yeah.
I would prefer. I'm curious how you would add on to that.
Yeah, that's excellent stuff. I I want to, so at least in the case of Uromastyx, there's something that I feel like stands out to me here that relates to this, which is when you have an example of, say, Uromastyx yemenensis or Uromastyx princeps, um, Yemen and Somalia, their respective countries of origin, are fail states. So, there's no functioning government, there's no functioning conservation. Um, I mean, it does, that doesn't bode well for the future of anything, human or otherwise, in those countries, right? So that's a dangerous situation, and it's granted. You know, there's this other aspect of this invisible arc concept, which is there's definitely an argument to be made that it is kind of a I think that the counter argument goes something like, well, the reality is the vast majority of what we do is going to have no impact whatsoever on wild habitats. It's not really, no one's ever going to come knocking on my door because ornate Uromastyx are no longer existing in the wild and want to take my animals and put them back there. That's not really going to happen. I mean, sure that you could certainly cite some rare exceptions in the past, and there's lots of great examples of zoos, working with regulatory bodies to help stabilize or restore certain populations of other animals, but there's not exactly a lot of examples of this with herps. I mean, they're there, but they're uh, not a lot of them. Uh,
Mhm.
but the part where it starts to really put rubber to the road for me anyway is when when you start widening your time horizons. So as soon as we start talking about the existence of an animal in human cultivation over the course of thousands of years or more, now we're talking about now we're getting into the realm of something that's genuinely adaptive, right? So one could cite certain plant species like corn or soy. One could also take a look at things like koi or horses or dogs or cattle, cats, things like this that have been we have fucked with for millennia, and have not only completely changed from their wild counterpart, but we've also um, we've basically become the vector through which these animals spread and reproduce and sustain themselves. So I think Michael Pollan is one of the guys who's sort of popularized that idea with corn, that corn domesticated us. It's sort of a funny play on concepts and words, which, I mean, I don't think it's terribly off base. I mean, it makes sense from a philosophical perspective, and I think an evolutionary perspective. I mean, it's no different than any other animal that figures out how to adhere itself to another, right? Like like any symbiotic relationship that we can think of out there, they all have, there's lots of examples to think of. So that's to me, because look at like koi are totally different from carp. I mean, they're the same thing, sort of like a dog is still a wolf, right? Genetically speaking, but there are so many more koi and in so many more places and reproducing vigorously and surviving and getting by and passing their genes along. It's just in a modified environment. It's not identical to the natural environment, but it's a part of it. It's a place, right? It's not a fake. I mean, I think it's really easy for people to think about captivity as this fake place where we're fake rocks, fake plants, fake whatever, right? Supplementation, fake lights, fake sun. It's all okay, fine, but it's not fake. It's just altered. It's alternative. It's a slight difference. It's not, everything we have is still subject to similar pressures, of Darwinian evolution. It's just we're the ones putting those pressures on them, or at least most of them, And so, when I think about what's the green iguana going to be like, the captive green iguana going to be like in 500 years, maybe it's going to be very, very different from the ones you're going to find in the rainforest in Peru or Brazil. But, maybe not. Maybe they'll be very similar. Maybe they'll look like koi comparatively. Same thing with the bearded dragon. I mean, you could probably say that even bearded dragons and leopard geckos now don't resemble their wild counterparts anymore at all. And probably even that would undoubtedly be reflected genetically and physiologically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of in the same way that if you and I gave a lipid panel to the doctors, or if the doctors gave us the results back from our lipid panel, and we compared them side by side with someone in living in the Hadza right now in a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, we're going to see two very different physiologies, and so I think that's where, for me, the invisible arc concept starts to really make sense, because as soon as we're talking about long-term time horizons and timescales, now we're talking about something else that's not the wild thing anymore, but it is still a valid thing living in this altered existence that still has consequences and feelings and goals and needs and things like that. So that's part of what I get interested in when I think about the invisible arc stuff.
Totally. I love those points. I feel like this also kind of touches on something that I think is interesting about and valuable about herpetoculture, is that for a lot of these species that people are keeping, they're actually like very early on in the arc of domestication.
Mm-hmm.
And they are still very wild. For some species like some that you mentioned, bearded
Mm-hmm.
dragons, leopard geckos, ball pythons at this point,
Mm-hmm.
where you have thousands of generations or hundreds of generations born in captivity, they are definitely altered at this point.
Yeah.
And in part by the imperfect selection of people.
Yep. Yep.
And but like in the case of a lot of species, they are still very, very much wild creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is also like a in itself really valuable for people who otherwise don't have much exposure to quote unquote wildness, or wilderness. People in inner cities, people that don't have access to like wild nature out their back door. It's really valuable to still
Mm-hmm.
be able to interact with wild creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like that's a huge thing that's influenced me in terms of like coming back to herpetoculture, is like a lot of that kind of time in that hiatus. I spent a lot of that time in the backcountry, and
Mm-hmm.
hiking and camping and having encounters with wild animals. And that has hugely influenced the way that I keep herps
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, like I go to the lengths that I do to provide live plants from where they're from, and
Mm-hmm.
large, relative to some other styles of keeping Bavaria and all that stuff, is to actually encourage some of that wildness and learn from it. And for me, that's like really what makes me tick, is seeing behaviors emerge, novel behaviors that I otherwise wouldn't know were there, emerge because this species is like hardwired to know to seek out this type of plant for water, you know. Like when I first put large bromeliads in with the puffing snakes, for example, you know, my 2 adult female puffing snakes are both wild caught, and within like minutes they both were like checking out these bromeliads to see if they had water in the axle of the bromeliad. And that's still one of the places that they prefer to drink. And that makes perfect sense. Like, these are snakes that probably spend a lot of their time up in the canopy of these huge trees, and the most readily available source of water is in the reservoir of these bromeliads, you know. And seeing them go and, you know, like a couple times a week and harvest water from the bromeliads, for me, is like a really amazing. It's totally like, who cares, you know, to a lot of people. For me, that was like an amazing observation the first time I saw it. I was like, oh, of course, you know.
Right.
And and like the health of those snakes improved because of that. Like, they were better hydrated, you know, because they didn't have to like descend to the ground to get to the water bowl, or they didn't have to wait until the mister turned on to come out and drink.
Right.
So I think that there's ways in which that that opportunity for us to experience wildness, even if it's like by proxy, even if it's like a reduced form of wildness, it's really important. You know, I think that anyone who spends like enough time in wilderness or wild places or around wild animals develops an appreciation for that. You know, it's and it's, yeah, it's just it's something that enriches the human experience. And I think that also, in terms of how it impacts like the whole invisible arc, and how it impacts positive outcomes for the world and for biodiversity, is that, you know, when people fall in love with wild creatures, they want to protect them.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
and they start to care about, like, you know, it's like you probably know a lot more about Somalia and Yemen now that you keep your mastics than you did before. And you're probably a lot more invested, however painfully it might be in those places than you were before.
Totally.
For me, it's a similar thing. You know, it's like I have a different appreciation for the Amazon, you know.
Oh yeah.
You know, and in the peril that it's in, because like that's where these creatures come from. And they are expressions of that place.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I couldn't agree more with all of that. You know, and for me, there's also been this something I've been thinking a lot about lately, is the balance that we strike. Because you know, the way that you keep is extremely refined and sophisticated. And it's not to say that, you know, another keeping style is not any of those things. It's just a different, it's just really interesting expression. Like, this is the way you want to see this done, you know? Right. So this is maybe going to be a bit of a stretch in terms of relatability, but bear with me on this. So, you know, people have been, I think the more and more you get involved and you look into the history of not just the keeping of animals, but specifically the movement of animals and creatures across the globe, specific with regard to human movement of animals across the globe, you start to, you know, you learn about different stuff, like how the dingo, you know, didn't evolve in Australia. It was brought there, but it's been there for so damn long, it's become this part of the ecosystem there. And or, you know, there's another like for example, I believe the earthworm and the honeybee, I think neither of them are native to North America. And yet, you know, one of the things I can remember doing as a kid is going and catching earthworms so I can go fishing, and then also finding beehives and wasps nests so I could see. I mean, the wasps aren't really part of the picture, but the bees anyway. It's remarkable because, you know, I didn't know that honeybees weren't native to the U.S. I just had no idea. And so another example is I was listening to it's a Long Now presentation, the Long Now Foundation, and I believe it was Charles Mann, Mann with two N's, and he was giving a talk about this type of thing. And so he was citing examples of different grasses in South America that were brought over, I think, from Africa, like African grasses or something. I can't recall exactly, but they're different, you know, grasses from a different continent brought over, and they're now just totally like eroding the rainforest because the grass outcompetes everything and just takes it over and you know, just grows. But he was also talking about, and I thought this was somewhat more interesting, he was also mentioning how in the San Francisco Bay, something like 80% of the flora and fauna are completely non-native, which, okay, and he gave quite a few examples of this. And the part of his reason for talking about it was, and this was I'm paraphrasing now, obviously, but he was saying that, you know, this idea that we have of a fully pristine, unaltered, unchanging world is inaccurate, right? And the problem is, if you're environmentally minded and conscious, you hear things like invasive species, non-native species, outcompeting the native wildlife, and you hear all this stuff, and alarm bells go off in your head. You're like, oh no, this is a huge problem. It's our fault. We probably did something. And to be sure, in a lot of situations, like the cats in Australia or cats here, or, you know, lionfish in the Gulf, whatever, you name it. Yeah, there's some problems out there, but this guy giving the talk traces this kind of stuff all the way back to like way before any kind of developed modern society. Like, this has been happening forever. You know, look at the dog. You know, we brought the dog everywhere. You know, the cat, we brought it everywhere. And yes, is it a real problem when stuff goes extinct and is eliminated because of something like that? Yeah, it sucks sometimes. But we also have to acknowledge that our biosphere is changing, and it's amoebic and amorphous, and, you know, the borders are totally porous, man. And so in my opinion, I think that idea, that kind of narrative thread applies a little bit to what we do. Now, it's very indirect, but you know, it's not too weird for me to think about some fantasy land where I can jump forward 2,000 years into the future and I can look at what Florida looks like. You know what I mean? Because by that time, no one's gonna even be paying attention to what is invasive and what's not. It's just gonna be the way things are, and things maybe will have stabilized a little bit. I'm sure they'll be very different then than they are now. But and I'm not saying any of this stuff to like argue that some negative outcomes are a good thing. It's not that. It's just meant to talk about the ways that we have a habit of like conceptualizing the movement of animals across the world by human hands as purely negative, full stop. And it's just not accurate. It's just not not useful, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is totally my wheelhouse, like where we're going here with this. And also another one of the reasons why I think herpetoculture is valuable is that I think it can kind of introduce some concepts of ecological literacy, which I think is something that we're really desperately lacking in just like the general population in all over the place, but definitely here in the US. A lot of people just have no interest in like the ecology around them, and they're unaware that like it's actually like that ecology that allows them to be alive.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
Like it's really easy for us as humans. It's really easy for us to see ourselves as separate from the ecologies, but really the reality is that we're embedded in these systems. We're completely reliant on these systems, and their well-being is important for our well-being. And in that way, like preserving or conserving biodiversity is its own reward. But I think about this stuff a lot, you know, living in California. It's like, it really wasn't that long ago that like the first European settlers like came to California, like largely wiped out the majority of the indigenous population who had been managing this land base for millennia. There's like profound biocultural diversity here. And now, you know, like let's say 250 years later, when really it's like not even that long, we're facing all kinds of issues in California. I don't know if you've noticed about the news about California, but it's pretty it's one thing after another.
You mean California's not just having a great time right now? Everything's not going perfectly in California.
Things are not going perfectly in California. We're suffering some serious issues that related to like our ecology here. And a lot of that has to do with just, again, like that lack of baseline ecological literacy. But it's like, the reality is that we're in that period of like, on a geological timescale, on an ecological timescale, shit is very recently fucked up in California. You know, and it has not stabilized. You know, I think about like, you know, at the time of the first European settlers arriving in California, there were an estimated 10,000 grizzly bears in California. 70 years post 1849, there are no grizzlies in California. So in a 70-year period, 10,000 grizzlies are extirpated. This is a huge animal that has a profound impact on wherever it is. And like the land itself has not yet recovered from the loss of grizzly bears.
Right.
You know, there are trees alive right now that were still alive when grizzly bears were here. A lot of them.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's also interesting, like, because now we have more black bears in California than we've ever had. There's more than 50,000 black bears now. And part of the reason for that is that they're like starting to occupy ecological niches that used to be occupied only by grizzlies. And so there's all kinds of stuff that's happening that like, we're like, yeah, as you said, we think of like landscapes being on like, that's just the way they are. But really, the reality is they're constantly in flux, you know, and a lot of the issues that we're seeing with fire are related to that. They're related to like natural patterns of ecological succession and how we have interfered in negative ways with some of these patterns and some of the checks and balances. And in California, the big one is fire. You know, we've suppressed fire because our forests are the Department of Agriculture. You know, it's a crop. That forest is a crop in the eyes of the government, essentially, and their interest is in protecting the crop. Well, when you suppress fires for 150 years, you have catastrophic fuel load building. And now when we have fires, good luck managing them, because they're a whole other category of thing. You know, and so I think that this, again, these are all things that on like the slightest level, you can kind of get some insight into like the complexity of nature and into like the complexity of ecological systems from setting up a vivarium or even a simple setup for a reptile and just observing the way that it interacts in its environment.
Right, for sure. Yeah, that's again, lots of really good points there. Yeah, it's been an interesting seeing the way you can learn and grow as a person just through maintaining any kind of passion, but specifically something like herpetoculture. Anytime you're working with other living creatures, it's going to sound like super corny, but when you're obsessed with this kind of stuff, you end up watching and listening to and reading things that are even tangentially related. And, it just causes quite the expansion of your perspectives and your awarenesses. And then even something as corny as when some of the kids that I teach jujitsu to, they ask their parents if they can come to my shop, and occasionally I'll let some of the kids and their parents and their families come and check out the reptile shop. And that talking with those kids about it and telling them where do they come from and like what do they eat and all this stuff, that's how it all begins. That's how you give them a little nugget of what they wanted, and then it just creates more curiosity within them, and that can only be a good thing, I think. Again, with the effort that people put into trying to justify our industry, I mean, I can't think of anything. I mean, obviously, we can get into the nitty gritty and the philosophical all day long, but just when it comes down to that kind of thing, where you're talking about teaching young people how to learn and how to grow and how to interact with other things, I can't imagine a better use of your time.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think that that's been really true for me. It's like, a lot of the work that I do outside of herpetoculture and stuff like that it's all like related to ecology and kind of naturalist work, and stewardship and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know that I would have ever arrived at that without the influence of herpetoculture on me, because what I wanted to do was like I wanted to, as a kid, it's like my parents asked me, what do you want to do? I want to go look for lizards. I want to go look for snakes, and like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do for your birthday? Let's go to the park and like get into the back trails, and I'm going to find a snake, like that's all I wanted to do. And as soon as I could drive, or take the bus, that's all I did, as a young person. Like I got out and I had tons of dirt time. And the reality is, like, my motivation in that was finding herps, it was like finding snakes. But that motivation led me to everything. Like that led me to finding like, oh wow, I really love oak trees, and like, oh, what kind of oak tree is this? And like, or what kind of tree is that? And then suddenly I'm like, wow, I love all of this stuff. I love this whole ecology, and like the reptile that I'm in search of is just one expression of that ecology, and that was like such an amazing thing to like to get to the point where I knew some of my local species well enough that I could be like in an a plant community or a certain like piece of habitat and feel like, okay, this feels like king snake habitat, or like this feels like gopher snake habitat. And then like 2 minutes later, there's one right there. And like that just happened over like years, of like, and I'm picking up on these little patterns of like what kind of leaf litter is here, and like as a kid, I'm not cognitively aware of like why this habitat feels like the right habitat for this species, but like sure enough, there's the species, like there's definitely something to it, and so that is, I think, just such an amazing feeling, to begin to see these animals as expressions of where they are or where they come from. And I think that there's just something really beautiful and poetic about that.
Yeah, I agree. Have you ever, I'm sure this is not new to anybody other than me, but have you ever so like looked at certain animals and think like, oh, you look like your country of origin? Like when I see like Euromastix thomasi, I think I'm like, you look like Oman. You look like Oman. Like it just the aesthetic of the animal looks like the aesthetic of the place, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I think there's also a way in which like I feel like, it's almost like I mean, here I can go get like really into the weeds, into philosophical stuff about it, but like I think that for me it also relates to culture, where I think that particularly coming from like a Western framework of like what is culture, that question, and people tend to think about like, yeah, here comes the mist.
That's great.
In my aquariums in the background here. Little afternoon shower. But people tend to think about like, okay, what's culture? And like they think about like the Louvre, and like and like museums and art and San Francisco and Paris and like these beautiful cities and stuff like that, And for me, I think of like culture is like what emerges from being in one place long enough, and by that definition, like humans are not the only things that have culture. I think that like animals in their own way have culture. Like they have as you said, like their aesthetic matches where they're from. I think that's a really beautiful way to speak to it. But you can also get a sense of like it's even more refined than that, because like they're also, it's not just like the country that they're from, it's like this little micro habitat within this or on this one slope of this one mountain is like, and that creature has like co-evolved with that place to perfectly suit it. And that's just like, that's so amazing to me to think about that, and it really makes me want to like go to the places where these species come from and like actually see it and actually feel that, because I know it's like, I know that my vivariums are like a shoddy replication of that in comparison.
Well, they they look a lot better than jigsawed kiddie pools, I can tell you that much. But yeah,
if I was keeping Euromastics, I'd probably have jigsawed kiddie pools.
You might
too.
Maybe, yeah, but you probably paint them and put some fancy, you know what I mean? It'd be extra fancy. Instead of now, it's like I can't take pictures in my Euro cages inside them anymore. Like the only way I'll take a picture if the animal's in the cage is if I can crop out the blue walls and because this
and like the clownfish.
God damn it! Yes, yeah, exactly. Yes, it's the worst, man. And I'm like, my God, people must think I'm a cheap bastard for doing this. But there is something. So I have over here on my wall a photograph that my friend Nick Dokai gave me, and it's a photo he took of a male Baja collared lizard out in Southern California on a rock, just out on a rock through a I don't remember what kind of plant that is. I can't see it. I can't remember. I can't see it from here, but it's like through a plant on a rock, and there's a Baja collared on the rock. And like there's something about being, I mean, personally, I get this mostly in the desert. I'm sure that if I went to the Amazon, I'd feel something akin to this cosmically. But there's something about the desert. There's specifically the American, like the Mojave Desert, right? And that is just, it's just so magical, just something so otherworldly and so like ancient and like quiet, but really powerful. And when I'm out there with my friends or even just by myself or whatever, and stumbling on anything out there, whether it's a granite spiny or a Baja collared lizard or a speckled rattlesnake or a rosy boa or a chuckwalla, whatever, it is remarkable. It is finding them out there, figuring they're just being exactly as they came to be in the world is the closest thing I can find to a miracle. I mean, other kinds of life too, sure, but like, you know, just there's something about it that it's just like, oh my God, this is unreal. This it's a crazy.
I totally relate to that. I mean, especially that place, you know, especially like the Mojave, and just like, I mean, if you haven't been there, like, we're talking
nuts.
in some places, it's like lunar landscape. There's nothing about it that feels hospitable at all.
No, not even close.
You're out at like Amboy Crater, and it's like black volcanic rock fields as far as the eye can see, and like nothing else, and it's 120 degrees.
Oh, it's awful.
And it's like, how can anything live here? You know, and then you see a chuckwalla, you know, or something that's like the perfect, it's the exact same color as those stones, you know. Like,
and when you see it
emerged from that place, and you're like, no way.
and when you see it, the animal looks at you like you would die immediately. Like they know, and they're like, watch. I love the way that collards will watch your eyes, and the chucks, they'll watch your eyes in particular. So that way, when you look away, they take off, you know, like, and they just know, they're like, listen, I am at ease in my environment. And I'm frankly very jealous of that, because I am quite certain that for people who live either agrarian or hunter-gatherer lifestyles, it's the same thing. I'm sure they feel completely at ease in their environment, not a shred of anxiety about a damn thing. And but this also makes me think of, so when I was in SoCal with the same guy, Nick Dokai, we were looking for Baja collared lizards, and we spotted one. We were kind of walking up a wash, and this granite wash. We spotted one kind of off the wash part of the trail. It was not really a trail, but the wash makes it kind of a trail, right? We spotted one off to the right over here, and it was on a big boulder that was about the size of a couch, but the boulder was like half submerged in the earth. So it was this huge, just stone platform, boulder obligate, right? Of course. And this collard is sitting right on top. And so, you know, we're looking at it through our binoculars, and Nick goes to approach it from, you know, way over here, because we were going to go catch some. And he's walking around, and, you know, he's getting close to it. He's looking at it through the binoculars. He's kind of chilling. And and I'm like just hanging back, just providing secondary you know, just keeping an eye on it in case when he looks down, it darts off. And the thing, at one point when Nick, like, he sets his backpack down, and the collared lizard like bolts, and we thought that it was taken off because it was going to go, it saw him, freaked out, and was bailing, right? Because they do that. But what it did was it flew off the rock to catch a locust, a big grasshopper that had flown over like Nick's head and like landed on the grass, came and grabbed it, swallowed it, and then popped right back up on the boulder, and was just like, hey, you know. I mean, it is the stupidest, most simple behavior ever. But when it happens like that, so fucking organically, nobody threw that grasshopper in there, nobody fed it for him. That thing, it like made a mistake, and it came in the view of this lizard and suffered the consequences. And that lizard was like, yes, gonna live today, you know. Like,
yes,
it's so
that's
sick.
The good stuff. That's the good stuff, man. I totally am with you on that. It's amazing seeing stuff like that. I mean, that brings to mind the first time I saw a San Joaquin coach whip, which is the threatened species of coach whip, or subspecies of them that used to be all throughout kind of like the southern central valley of California, and now they're just isolated to like these tiny little fragments of their original range because of all the agriculture and just the atrocity that is California. And I was in one of the places that is like actually still relatively intact. And I knew that these snakes were there, but I'd never seen one. And in the back of my mind, I was kind of like, this is the first time I'd ever gone to this place, and I was with some other friends who were naturalists, and we were just like full on geek patrol, just like looking for kit foxes and badgers and finding tracks and like staying up way into the night driving the road so we could see all the owls and stuff that were out. And it was like, amazing for me. But we're walking at this one spot, and it's a really cool spot because it's right on the San Andreas Fault, which is like the big fault line that kind of traverses like along kind of north to south on California. And it's like the fault, all the major earthquakes that everyone's heard about, the 1906 quake that destroyed San Francisco happened. So we're on that fault line, we're walking on it. And there's this one section where, like, because it's a sliding fault, I forget what the name, that type of fault, but anyway, it's basically two plates sliding against each other. And because of that, there's this watershed, this little creek that's going along, and it just kind of stops, and then like 50 feet down continues, because it's like, it's just slid along this plate. And we're walking along it, and it's like barren. There's like some little shrubs and stuff like that, but it's very dry. It's very hot. And one of my friends is with me, and he stops and he's like, "Oh my God, it's eating something." And I'm like, what is? And like, I look, and there's this huge San Joaquin coach whip, like probably between 5 and 6 feet long. And it's periscoped up, and it's got a blunt-nosed leopard lizard halfway down its mouth. And it's just sitting there with this lizard hanging out its mouth,
yes, dude,
facing us.
Yes.
And I'm like, and I just like slowly start lowering my backpack to the ground. And I kind of like get into my sprint posture, and I like beeline for this snake. And it is like, no way, buddy.
No, dude.
Get it. And it just like evaporates into the landscape, and I literally did like a full on like baseball slide dive trying to catch like the last few inches of this snake's tail, which I probably shouldn't be saying because it's a threatened species and you're not supposed to touch them, but
allegedly,
allegedly this happened.
Yeah.
And about 10 minutes later, I did find another one that I did hold and took pictures of, which was really rad. But that first one, it was like, just like everything about it was just a huge one. It was the biggest coach whip I've seen in person, especially for that subspecies. They're smaller, and it was thick, healthy snake, and it has a leopard lizard in its mouth.
That is so cool.
Another endangered species that's like barely found down there.
Yeah.
And just like, I love that the snake was sitting there eating while periscoped up, watching us.
Yeah.
Like, what are these lizards doing over here?
Oh, that is so cool, man. Yeah. I still have the only leopard lizards I've ever seen now have been one in Moab, Utah. I was at the Arches National Park, and with an old girlfriend of mine, and we were hiking from back from Delicate Arch, and there was a gravid female digging a burrow right on the side of the trail, and that was cool. And then I saw one. I got my hands on one in Arizona, just herping out with some friends out there. We saw one on the berm of a road, and we were able to catch it and get some photos and stuff. But the one I haven't seen the blunt nose yet. Well, that's not true. I saw one very briefly in Southern California near El Centro, and in the mountains over there. And we were looking for Bajas again, and there was a little baby Baja on a rock. And when the baby Baja darted, I was trying to find the movement in the ground, on the ground around the rock, and went through the binoculars and didn't see the collared, but I did see a leopard lizard that was clearly had been chasing the collared lizard. Now, I don't think he got it. We didn't see what happened. There was nothing else. It was nothing, but it was, I'm still pissed. Like, I really want to see one down there, because I know they're there, and I know that they, because them and the collards, they just eat each other all the, and I'm just like, I got to see it. It's going to be one day I'll see him down there. I've got friends who've seen him, but I haven't yet. So
they're amazing. That's actually the only one I've seen.
Oh, really?
Halfway down a Coach Whip's mouth. not the best way to see one, but
No.
yeah, I really want to see more. I actually have never seen the long nose too, which are supposedly the more common
Yeah.
species of the two and everything, but
Those things are mighty.
they're so, amazing. Yeah, amazing. These lizards they're not big lizards and they eat other lizards. It's
Oh
just like,
yeah.
what?
It's so
What
sick.
are these
Yeah.
things?
They're and
Yeah.
they look the part so dramatically, right? Like,
Oh
some
yeah.
collared lizards do too, to a certain extent, but that not the
Yeah.
same way that a leopard lizard does. It's like
Yeah.
a leopard lizard to me looks like a little reptilian version of a leopard seal, right? With
Yeah. Oh,
long
totally.
snout, that long, like I'm gonna crush it with this snout, just
Yeah.
and they do, man. I
Yeah.
know that there are guys like that. Jeff Lem has had some incredible photos of leopard lizards, and then also shout out to my buddy William Wells, who also the dude is a wizard with catching reptiles, doing cool shit. He had a series, the photos that he took of a collared lizard eating a leopard lizard, and it was like he just was able to sit
Wow.
and capture the whole thing, just snapshots. He said it took him a long time, but he swallowed
Yeah.
it's awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
I know it's amazing to me that then that a lizard can how do they digest something that big too? It's like,
No idea.
I guess it makes sense. They have like there's no lacking for reaching optimal thermal gradients and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that stuff out there.
Right.
If it's nice and
Yeah.
hot. So they can probably process some serious meals. But
Probably.
yeah, I've seen some photo series of like leopards eating whiptails and stuff like that.
Oh
That
yeah.
look close to the same size, snout to
Uh-huh.
vent length
Or
as the leopard. And I'm just like, well, how the hell are they doing it?
yeah.
And they do it.
Or there's another good one. There's a photo online somewhere of a Crotophytus bicentori, so the Great Basin collared lizard, eating a baby chuckwalla, and the chuckwalla's, and it's head first, and the chuckwalla's puffed up,
Puffed up.
just super full with. So this bicentoris is swallowing a balloon, until he can pop, get maybe gnaw on the stomach. I don't know how he swallowed the whole thing, but also we'll have to have Nick on the show, because he doesn't.
Oh yeah.
I don't think he keeps anymore, but he has so much experience, and quite frankly, I don't know anybody who's spent. I know only a very small number of people who've spent as much time in the American Southwest deserts as he has, and he has. I wanted to show. We'd have to have him bring the photo and tell the story, but he had an adult male Baja collared lizard that he had in captivity, and the animal got out, couldn't find it, and one day he comes home, and in the summertime he kept all his herps in the basement, and in the summertime he'd leave the windows open to the window wells, and this collard had jumped into the window well and was eating a garter snake, and the garter snake was like a substantial garter snake. Nick he's got a photo of this damn collard swallowing the snake, and he said that the thing swallowed the snake, and he caught it again and put it back in its cage. It didn't barf, it didn't do it, it just digested it, took a giant dump, I guess, and
that is amazing, man.
Yeah, and if I hadn't seen the photo,
that is I believe it only because it's a collared lizard.
Oh yeah. And then wait till you see the picture, man. I'll have him bring on the photo, because it is remarkable. It's just like, how are you doing this? These incredible things, man. Well, let me see, how are we doing on time here? Oh, we're not even, I thought we would be, I thought, okay, an hour and 20 minutes. I was thinking we'd be 3 hours deep by now. Did it feel like
great.
that? Yeah.
It kind of felt like that to me. Yeah. I just wasn't paying attention at the time. I was like, all right, I'm just going to block it out and just be here for this.
Yeah, no, same.
I feel like this is a subject that can kind of go on endlessly.
Yeah, totally. And I'm sure that as we continue to do these shows, I'm sure we'll repeat ourselves and periodically revisit the same topics, and kind of probably go off on some of the same threads, because you know, I think with these kinds of conversations, stuff can get overlooked, not intentionally, and, you know, not because we're being ignorant or something, but just because, you know, we'll talk about a certain idea or concept that has a lot wrapped up in it. And there might be a lot more that we want to sort of touch base on and talk about, you know, in a given topic, but may not always be able to remember them kind of when it comes time to that. At least that's my problem. I don't know. I have that a lot where
No, definitely.
yeah. So maybe we I don't know how you feel, but maybe we'll call this one, and you know, maybe all right, let's let me stop the recording real quick here. Where's the little button?